Make sure it's oat milk, sweetheart. That's probably all you're good for. The billionaire didn't even look up when he said it. She just nodded, lowered her eyes, and waited. Because in 60 seconds, she would say one sentence that would silence the entire room and flip his entire empire upside down. Where are you watching from? Have you ever seen someone underestimated only to take control in a single moment? Just hours before no one in that room had any idea who she really was. The Manhattan boardroom gleamed with the sterile perfection of wealth, its floor-to-ceiling windows framing a city that never paused. The skyline stretched endlessly, a mosaic of ambition etched in glass and steel, indifferent to the human dramas unfolding within its shadow. Inside, the air hummed with the confidence of men who believed they owned the world, or at least this particular slice of it. The Casa Lumiere acquisition meeting was in full swing, a high-stakes chess game played with egos as much as numbers. Four executives, their tailored suits crisp and their Rolexes catching, the late afternoon light filled the room with the cadence of power-booming laughter, clipped commands, and the clink of crystal glasses raised to their own brilliance. At the center of their orbit, though unnoticed in the way a cog is unnoticed, until it jams, stood Emma Collins. 28, she wore a white apron over a soft blue dress, the kind of understated garment that whispered practicality rather than prestige. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, her face bare of makeup, her presence so unassuming it seemed to dissolve into the polished mahogany table she served. She moved with the quiet precision of someone who had learned to be invisible, delivering steaming cups of coffee to the men who barely registered her existence. Her hands steady and sure placed each cup with care, the porcelain whispering against the table's surface. Blake Harrington, the heir to the Harrington Empire, lounged at the head of the table, his posture a study in entitled ease. His dark hair was slicked back, his smile sharp enough to cut through the room's bravado. He was the kind of man who wielded charm like a weapon, disarming only to dominate. As Emma set a cup before him, he leaned forward, his eyes glinting with amusement. "Just make sure mine has oat milk, sweetheart," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, the word sweetheart landing like a barb. The room erupted in laughter, a chorus of performative mirth from the other executives' men, whose names blurred into a single archetype of polished arrogance. Their designer cufflinks flashed as they raised their glasses, toasting their own cleverness, their dominance, their untouchable status. Emma's response was a slight nod, polite, and measured her face a mask of neutrality. She said nothing, her silence louder than their laughter, though they were too self-absorbed to notice. Her eyes, a clear gray that held depths none of them bothered to explore, remained steady as she turned and glided toward the door. Her footsteps were soft, deliberate, the kind of quiet that carries weight only in hindsight. As the heavy door clicked shut behind her, the camera lingered on the scene she left behind the executives, their charts splayed across the table like battle plans, their projections glowing on a screen, their glasses clinking in a ritual of self-congratulation. The room pulsed with their certainty, their arrogance a tangible force that seemed to press against the glass walls. But beneath the surface of their triumph, a tension simmered. The Casa Lumiere deal, for all its glittering promise, hung on a precarious thread, the absence of the principal investor. This mysterious figure, the linchpin of the acquisition, had yet to reveal themselves, and the executives' confidence began to fray at the edges. They leaned into speculation, their voices rising with the fervor of men trying to convince themselves of their own omniscience. "It's got to be a Saudi investor," one declared, his tone authoritative, as if stating a fact carved in stone. "Or a tech billionaire," another countered, adjusting his tie with a flourish. "Someone like Musk may be playing coy." Their guesses filled the room, each one more grandiose than the last, as if the investor's identity could only match their own inflated sense of importance. Outside the boardroom, Emma stood alone by a window in the corridor, her silhouette framed against the sprawling cityscape. The skyline glittered, its lights flickering like distant stars, and she watched it with an intensity that belied her unassuming appearance. Her reflection in the glass was faint, almost ghostly, yet there was a stillness in her posture, a quiet resolve that seemed to anchor the chaos of the world beyond. The executives, lost in their own narrative, didn't see her there. They didn't notice the way her fingers brushed lightly against the window pane, as if tracing the outline of a future they couldn't yet fathom. To them, she was just a coffee girl, a fleeting presence, who existed only to serve and disappear. But Emma Collins was no mere spectator. Beneath her composed exterior burned a fire that had been tempered by years of being underestimated of navigating rooms like this one where power was flaunted and dismissed in equal measure. She had learned the art of silence, not out of weakness, but out of strategy. Each quiet moment a step toward a goal she held close. The executives' mockery, their casual cruelty, slid off her like rain on glass, leaving no mark. She had heard worse, endured worse, and emerged stronger for it. Her unreadable expression, the one they mistook for subservience, was a shield, a canvas onto which they projected their assumptions while she calculated, observed, waited. The boardroom's laughter faded into a distant hum as the camera pulled back, revealing the stark contrast between the two worlds, the executives cocooned in their self-assured bubble, and Emma standing alone yet unshaken, her gaze fixed on the horizon. The tension of the deal's uncertainty hung in the air, a silent question that neither the charts nor the projections could answer. Who was the mystery investor? The executives' guesses, for all their bluster, were shots in the dark, each one missing the mark by a mile. They couldn't imagine that the answer might be closer than they thought, standing just beyond their line of sight, watching the city with eyes that saw more than they ever would. The city itself seemed to hold its breath, its pulse thrumming in time with Emma's quiet resolve. Manhattan was a place of relentless ambition, where dreams were forged and broken in the same breath, and she had learned its rhythms well. She knew the weight of being overlooked, the power of being underestimated. And as she stood by the window, the skyline stretching before her like a map of possibilities, she carried a secret that would unravel the executives' carefully constructed world. The Casa Lumiere deal, their monument to their own greatness, was not theirs to claim, not yet and perhaps not ever. The principal investor, the one they speculated about with such fervor, was no distant billionaire or foreign magnate. The truth was far closer, far more unexpected, and it wore a white apron over a soft blue dress. The boardroom, once a fortress of unassailable confidence, seemed to hold its breath as the heavy door swung open. The executives' laughter had long since faded, replaced by an uneasy hum of anticipation. The Casa Lumiere acquisition, their gilded prize, teetered on the edge of completion, its fate tethered to the elusive principal investor, whose identity had sparked their fevered guesses. The firm's legal counsel, a wiry man with a clipboard clutched like a shield, stepped inside his voice, cutting through the room's restless energy. The principal investor has arrived, he announced, his words landing with the weight of a gavel. All eyes turned to the door, expecting a titan of industry, a Saudi prince perhaps, or a Silicon Valley visionary draped in the aura of untouchable wealth. Instead, the figure who entered was achingly familiar, yet impossibly out of place. Emma Collins stepped into the room. Her white apron gone, the soft blue dress now fully visible. Its simple elegance a quiet rebuke to the room's ostentatious splendor. Her blonde hair remained tied back, her face still bare of makeup, but there was a shift in her presence, a subtle, unshakable authority that seemed to reshape the air around her. The executives froze their expressions, a kaleidoscope of disbelief and dawning comprehension. Blake Harrington, the self-assured heir whose mockery had set the tone earlier, blinked twice as if trying to reconcile the woman before him with the coffee girl he'd dismissed. Emma's gray eyes swept the room, calm but unyielding, as she took her place at the table. The silence stretched taut and electric until she spoke, her voice steady and clear, each word a stone dropped into still water. "I'm Emma Collins," she said, "and as of this morning, Collins Equity has completed the acquisition of the entire Casa Lumiere portfolio." The statement was a thunderclap, its impact rippling through the room. The executives sat motionless, their polished facades cracking under the weight of her words. One of them, a man with a Rolex that gleamed like a trophy, stammered, his voice betraying his shock. "You're the waitress." Emma's gaze locked onto him, her expression serene but piercing. "No," she said, her tone measured but laced with steel. "I'm the one who built this firm from the ground up while you laughed." The words were not a retort, but a reckoning, a quiet dismantling of the assumptions that had blinded them. The room seemed to shrink, the towering windows and gleaming table no longer symbols of their dominance, but a stage for their miscalculation. As the executives grappled with their disbelief, the narrative shifted, pulling back the curtain on Emma's journey through a series of vivid, heart-rending flashbacks. In a small, weathered diner in rural Pennsylvania, a younger Emma moved with purpose, balancing trays of steaming plates, while her mother Grace worked double shifts behind the counter. Grace's hands, calloused from years of labor, moved with a quiet grace, her tired eyes alight with a fierce love for her daughter. "Keep going, Emmy," She'd say, her voice a lifeline in the din of clattering dishes. "You're meant for more than this." Those words, repeated like a prayer, became the bedrock of Emma's ambition, fueling her relentless work ethic. The flashbacks wove a tapestry of sacrifice and determination. By day, Emma served coffee and pie to truckers and locals, her smile warm, but her mind elsewhere. By night, she pored over library books on finance, her desk a cluttered shrine to self-education. The glow of a single lamp illuminated her notes pages, filled with equations, market analyses, and dreams too big for the diner's peeling walls. She taught herself the language of wealth, decoding its rhythms while the world slept. Each sleepless night, each callus on her hands was a step toward a future she could almost touch, a future her mother had dared her to chase. Back in the boardroom, Emma's voice drew the room back to the present, her words carrying the weight of those unseen years. "I bought Casa Lumiere for a reason." She said, her gaze steady, her voice rich with conviction. "My mother used to dream of working there, of being part of something grand. But people like her, people like us, were always stuck in back kitchens, invisible to the world you inhabit." The executives shifted uncomfortably, their earlier arrogance now a liability. "I'm here to change that." Emma continued, her words not a plea but a promise, imbued with the quiet power of someone who had already rewritten the rules. Blake Harrington, his composure fraying, tried to reclaim control, his voice smooth but strained. "We didn't know," he said, leaning forward, his hands spread in a gesture of false contrition. "If we had—" Emma cut him off, her interruption swift and precise, like a blade through silk. "That's the point," she said, her eyes locking onto his. "You didn't want to know." The rebuke was devastating in its simplicity, exposing the willful blindness that had defined their interactions. Blake's smile faltered, his charm useless against the truth she laid bare. The other executives, their Rolexes and designer suits suddenly garish, averted their gazes as if the weight of her words might crush them. The room felt smaller now. The Manhattan skyline beyond the windows, no longer a symbol of conquest, but a reminder of a world far larger than their ambitions. Emma stood at the center of it all, her presence a quiet revolution. She was not just the woman who had outmaneuvered them, not just the architect of Collins Equity's rise. She was the daughter of a diner worker, the inheritor of a dream that had been deferred too long. Her acquisition of Casa Lumiere was more than a business triumph. It was a reclamation, a rewriting of a narrative that had excluded people like her mother for generations. As the legal counsel shuffled papers signaling the meeting's abrupt end, the camera lingered on Emma. Her expression was not one of triumph, but of quiet resolve, a woman who had fought her way to this moment and knew the battles still to come. The executives, their confidence shattered, gathered their things in silence, their earlier bravado reduced to ash. The city outside pulsed on its lights, flickering like the dreams that had carried Emma this far. She had stepped out of the shadows not to bask in their light, but to redirect it, illuminating a path for those who had been unseen for too long. The boardroom, once a theater of unchecked hubris, now lay hushed, its polished surfaces reflecting the weight of a moment that had rewritten its purpose. Beyond the towering windows, Manhattan's skyline shimmered with the restless energy of a city that thrived on reinvention, its spires piercing the late afternoon sky like silent sentinels. The Casa Lumiere acquisition, which had begun as a monument to the executive's ambitions, had become something else entirely, a testament to Emma Collins's vision forged in the crucible of her past and tempered by her unyielding resolve. The air was heavy with the aftermath of her revelation, the executive's once loud confidence reduced to a brittle quiet, their designer suits and gleaming cufflinks now mere props in a drama they no longer controlled. Blake Harrington's departure was as understated as it was decisive. The legal counsel, his face a mask of professional detachment, murmured a few words and gestured toward the door. Blake rose, his tailored jacket creasing under the strain of his forced composure, his earlier swagger replaced by the halting steps of a man confronting his own irrelevance. The door closed behind him with a soft thud, a sound that reverberated like the closing of a chapter. The remaining executives sat in stunned silence, their eyes darting between the empty chair and the woman who had dismantled their world with nothing more than her truth. Emma stood at the head of the table, her soft blue dress a quiet rebellion against the room's ostentatious wealth. Her blonde hair still tied back, framed a face that bore no trace of triumph, only the calm certainty of someone who had fought for every inch of this moment. She addressed the room, her voice clear and resonant, each syllable carrying the weight of a life spent in the shadows. "From now on," she said, her gray eyes steady, We listen to the people who actually work here, not just those who sit at this table. The words were a clarion call, a rejection of the hierarchy that had elevated a few while dismissing the many. The executives, their faces taut with unease, felt the ground shift beneath them, their privilege exposed as a fragile illusion in the face of her resolve. Her vision for Casa Lumiere unfolded with the precision of a promise kept. She announced a new company structure, one that would rewrite the rules of an industry built on exclusion. Fair pay would be the foundation, not a concession, ensuring that every worker could stand with dignity. Promotions would rise from within, honoring the talent and tenacity of those who had labored unseen rather than rewarding the well-connected. Respect for service, staff, servers, dishwashers, custodians would be the heartbeat of the company, a radical act of recognition in a world that had deemed them disposable. Emma's plan was not a reform, but a reimagining, a pledge to build a legacy that echoed her mother's dreams and the countless others who had been confined to the margins. The narrative shifted to vivid scenes of Emma moving through Casa Lumiere's bustling underbelly, her presence a quiet catalyst for change. In steamy kitchens, she leaned in to hear the stories of servers, their voices tentative at first, then emboldened by her genuine attention. She clasped the hands of dishwashers, their fingers rough from hours in scalding water, and met their gazes with a respect that felt like a long overdue acknowledgement. Each interaction was a thread in the tapestry she was weaving, a company where no one was reduced to a role or a function, but seen as a person with dreams as valid as her own. The camera lingered on her, her blue dress, a beacon of hope amidst the clatter of pots and the hum of voices, her quiet power reshaping the spaces she touched. In the boardroom's aftermath, a tentative step toward redemption emerged. One executive, a man whose earlier laughter had mirrored Blake's disdain, lingered as the others left his polished exterior, softened by a flicker of self-awareness. He approached Emma, his voice low, the words carrying the weight of a hard-won admission. "I misjudged you," he said, his eyes meeting hers with a sincerity that felt raw, unguarded. "I'd like to stay, but on your terms." Emma regarded him, her expression calm but searching, her silence a mirror reflecting his past choices. "Then start by apologizing to the woman who brings your coffee," she replied, her voice steady, the directive both a challenge and an invitation. It was not enough to seek forgiveness. He would need to rebuild his perspective, to see the world through the lens of those he had overlooked. He nodded, a mixture of resolve and humility in his gaze, and stepped away, the weight of her words a map for his redemption. As the room emptied, Emma took her seat at the head of the boardroom table, the city's skyline a radiant backdrop. Sunlight poured through the windows, enveloping her in a warm, golden glow that seemed to sanctify her presence. Before her sat the tray of espresso she had served earlier, its cups untouched, their dark surfaces catching the light like silent witnesses to her journey. The tray was no longer a symbol of subservience, but a relic of a narrative she had transcended, a quiet testament to the power of those who refuse to be defined by others' assumptions. Emma sat still, her hands resting lightly on the table, her gaze fixed on the horizon where Manhattan's spires met the sky. The city, with its ceaseless hunger for reinvention, had shaped Emma, but she was reshaping it in turn. Casa Lumiere would no longer be a fortress of exclusivity, but a sanctuary of possibility, a place where the labor of the overlooked was celebrated, where dreams like her mother's could take root and flourish. The sunlight behind her intensified, casting long beams across the table, illuminating the empty chairs where hubris had once reigned. Emma's power was not in the loudness of her voice, but in the quiet force of her actions, a force that would ripple far beyond this room. The camera pulled back, the boardroom, a small island in the vast sea of the city, Emma's silhouette a steadfast presence at its heart. The espresso tray gleamed untouched, a symbol of a past she had overcome and a future she would forge. The city's pulse thrummed in the distance, a rhythm she had mastered, and as the light bathed her, it was undeniable. Emma Collins was not just a victor, but a visionary, her quiet power a beacon for a world ready to listen. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't humiliate them back. She just stood in truth, and that was enough to shake the room. Emma Collins didn't want revenge. She wanted to rewrite the rules for her mother, for every worker ever dismissed as just the help. And she did. True leadership doesn't need to yell. It just walks in calm and owns the room. Have you ever been underestimated? Share your story below. And if this tale moved, you don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow Sir Alex Stories for more cinematic justice.